Elon Musk social media version. Hello, it's me, Elon Musk. The IMPAKT Festival in Utrecht contacted me to ask if I was interested in cooperating with them on their 2023 festival, dealing with art and technology. Well, as you know, I'm a big fan of technology. It is what I made my fortune with, and now it allows me to get my message across to audiences on all the continents. And with all that negativism around technology and people complaining about big tech, blah, blah, I'm glad that there finally is a festival in the Netherlands, of all places, that could become a moment where technology is presented in the right way, that does justice to it and the great potential it has. So I gladly accepted IMPAKT's invitation. I hope you will join me at the IMPAKT Festival 2023, my terms, my conditions.
Thank you, Elon Musk, for the kind opening. And thank you all the audience for joining us tonight here at the Stadsschouwburg in Utrecht. It's a wonderful evening for the start of IMPAKT Festival, our terms and conditions. And as you can see, we're two of us here on stage. My name is Friso Wiersum. I've been asked to assist Arjon on this opening night to ask all those boring things. If you can mute your phone, if it's still on sound, please mute it. Don't turn it off, because there's a hashtag for the night that says IMPAKT Festival that you can all use to comment on things happening on stage here. And then most of you will, I suppose, already have looked at the packed festival schedule that we have in front of us the upcoming days. It's a festival schedule with tons of programs that's been passing on the screen, and it's been put together by a team of curators that will be introduced to you a bit later on this evening. What else to say? That before introducing our two main speakers, Roozendaal sitting here on first row already, and Chelsea Manning, who is just hiding backstage before she's going to make an appearance here, I'd like to also give the opportunity to Arjon to also welcome all of you. Arjon.
Yeah, thanks, Friso. Welcome. It's very special to be here with all of you, with the guests of tonight that Friso already announced. At the opening of this year's IMPAKT Festival, our terms, our conditions. IMPAKT, as most of you know, is a festival that always has this focus from the arts on what technology and media do with our society, how it's changing our lives, our democracies, the way we experience love and intimacy. So this year, we thought it would be nice to continue from a project that we've been doing now for 3 years, CODE, Reclaiming Digital Agency. CODE stands for a code of digital ethics that we want to be discussed, and also that we want our governments to develop in order to give us a better position in this power imbalance that really we're dealing with between us and the providers from these technologies that we are using every day. And we cannot live without them, with the internet, with our smartphones. Some of you might try it and maybe even succeed, but the society at large cannot function without these infrastructures. So it's of essential importance that we determine the conditions under which these technologies are being used. And for that, we need politicians. They can develop the laws and legislations that provide us with this protection, that support our agency, and in general can take care of the digital rights, not just for ourselves, but for everyone in the world dealing with these technologies, being surveilled, whose data are being extracted, etc. So that's what we're going to discuss the upcoming 5 days at IMPAKT, together with great guests. You'll be introduced to some of them later tonight, but we're going to start with the guest of tonight, and I think, Friso, you will further introduce them to us.
Oh, okay, then I will do so. Most of you have already seen his name on the big screen, Roozendaal, who is replacing the Secretary of State, Staatssecretaris in Dutch, Minister in English, Alexandra van Uffelen, who cannot make it, and Ron will explain why she can't make it. Roozendaal is, as announced here, Director General on Digitalisation at the Ministry of the Interior, but he asked me to stress that it's actually the Deputy Director General on Digitalisation, for those people watching along tonight that think that, that's not your real function.
No one is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Ron will speak for about 10 minutes. Then we have a few questions that are actually prepared by a few special people here. I know that you are not all special, but as you know, the saying goes, some are more special than others. And they're sitting here on the first row. It's the main partner for this opening night and for the program on Saturday, PublicSpaces. And on their behalf, Geert-Jan Bogaerts will ask a question. And we have Evelyn Austin also having prepped a question on behalf of Bits of Freedom. Then, of course, there's opportunity for all of you to ask a few questions too. We can do so with this thing called a catch box. So it's this little dice. I think you know the trick. It will be thrown into the audience, and then if you would like to receive it, raise your hand. And once you have received it, will you please share your name with us so that we know who's asking the question, and will you try to formulate a question rather than give a long-standing essay, because if you would like to do so, you'll be booked for the opening night next year. Without further ado, Ron Roozendaal, floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Can I have a bit more light? I don't just see what's faces appear. A bit more. Thanks a lot. Now I'm talking to people instead to a black screen. Good evening all. You'll have to do with me, because Alexandra is where the real Elon is, in Bletchley Park in the UK, where world leaders now discuss the ethics of AI, where Kamala Harris is, and many others. So you have to do with me, unfortunately, but I'll try to make up for her. And I'm happy to be here for the same reason she would be here. Not only she lives here and I don't, but we have to steer digitalization in the right direction. And that is value-based and human-centric. And in the UK, they now talk about AI, which as a technology offers great opportunities, but requires safeguards. We demand cars and medicines to be developed safely and responsibly, and the same is also needed for technology. We need global oversight and uniform regulation to prevent a race to recklessness or a race towards the bottom. So digitalization needs to be value-driven and human-centric. And that is why I consider this to be an important event. Also, a very exciting one. And I would love to have chosen our terms, our condition, as the slogan for our own working agenda. I love it. Because the bottom line is we cannot passively agree to a future that tech is creating for us. We have to shape that future ourselves. We have to create a digital world we want to live in together by engaging in dialogue with society, digital artists, concerned citizens, people with ideas, and a communal spirit. The importance of artists in visualizing and shaping our shared technological future and challenging what companies and governments do can hardly be overstated. To identify important questions, to find the right answers. Artists shape our digital future not as a distant, detached observer, but as active participants in a grand and ongoing narrative. And what attracts me to this event and the programming is the very constructive, positive mindset that seems to be behind it, as well as a keen understanding of the challenges we are facing. Fair tech, as you call it, is about tech that works for everyone. It's about best practices, but it's also about steering innovation in the right direction through regulation. If we don't act, if we don't write the story of our online future, our values will not take center stage. And they should. Because otherwise, we can't assume that the future to be safe for everyone. We can't assume it to be inclusive. We can't assume that we would still be in control of our own digital world. Instead, it might very well be a world where the gains are for the few instead of the many, in which billionaires that challenge each other to a cage match being a pissing contest. It might be a world where minorities are portrayed in a stereotypical fashion because of biases in algorithms. It might be a world where disinformation roams free and artists' works get repurposed by AI systems without permission, without knowing, or without compensation. Let's be a bit more concrete. how can we build that world? It's about gaining insight into the inner workings of existing tech. It's about giving scientists access. It's about having to know about knowing what data is being collected, where it is being stored, and how it's being used. A small country like the Netherlands can make a big difference in how big tech adheres to public values. What we have been doing is ensuring that when the public sector uses digital technology, for example in schools, in libraries, or in government services, we set our own terms. Terms on data that is shared, how children are protected, how algorithms determine what content to show. And we are using our buying power to have the conversations that ensure public values are protected. And we do that by conducting data protection impact assessments and human rights impact assessments on digital services that have a big impact on our citizens. And as we did this week, if a company does not comply, that was Facebook, we ask the regulator for guidance and will stop using that service if it's not changed to comply. And there is a ripple effect. Measures taken by tech companies for the Netherlands are adopted in their international policies. This means that citizens worldwide benefit from better privacy protection. And the New York Times headlined how the Dutch are taming big tech. And with AI, and especially generative AI, new challenges arise. The social impact of this technology will be, and already is, monumental. It is having a big impact on our job market and education. Questions are being raised about privacy, about copyright and equal opportunity. Risks that are even called existential by famous scientists from around the globe. And that's why we are actively investing in research and we are developing regulation for which we are cooperating internationally. But please challenge us to invest in value-driven digitalization. Keep asking questions that stimulate debate in society. Questions like if client-side scanning of photos we send via messaging apps has a place in our society as a technical solution to prevent and combat child abuse. Or check if it's ethical to use micro-targeting on social media or follow readers of newsletters via tracking pixels. Besides regulating and setting boundaries, we should and will actively initiate alternative services and platforms, like we do with Mastodon and Polis. That is why digital commons also have an important role to play. Digital commons are a form of commons involving the distribution and communal ownership of informational resources and technology. They present us with a unique opportunity to support European digital open autonomy. Through collaboration between companies, government, academia, and civil society, we can build an internet that is responsive to people's needs, with open standards, open source, and communal ownership. To that end, last year we signed the Declaration towards a sovereign digital infrastructure of commons, together with 17 other EU member states. And recently we released a shared statement on democratic digital infrastructure. In it, we emphasized the need for a European Public Digital Infrastructure Fund designed to support digital public spaces and to democratize the digital transition. We believe Europe really should have this ambition. The ambition to stimulate the development of alternatives to give us a real choice. I hope today's program and exhibitions will inspire you to take action to create a society in which tech and digitalization works for everybody. And when entering this room, you may have seen a sign saying, "You will be photographed." I hope that even we here together will give everyone a choice to opt in a world that adheres to our public values. I look forward to engaging with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.
That's
Now,
within 10 minutes, was it?
That was really short in the 10 minutes that you were given. Now, when you were describing this world that might be coming, where actually citizens do not have many rights, or where tech, as we are not controlling it, might be the boss of our lives instead of us being the bosses of technology, you were talking in a future sense, but is it not the case that that is already happening right now?
Of course, it's happening. It's happening around us. It's happening when we go on social media and are addicted to some of the videos we are shown, for example. Yes, it's happening now.
So then, of course, the question that is underneath is, how can a government or public administration be in a driver's seat rather than be reactive to other developments in technology?
Well, in other sectors of society, like in cars or in medicine, it also took years to start regulating. But we now see that in the EU, we are at the front of regulating and starting to do that. And you see things happening. You see that the DSA, who just entered this year, is really changing the way platforms work. You see now that Facebook, for example, is having is challenging the way they are serving their platform to people. Like, you can pay for Facebook, they say, in the future without being shown ads, for example. So we are starting, and it's starting to work.
Facebook was actually in the news this morning also because Alexandra van Huffelen, who's not here, tried to make Facebook operate on her terms, and then it concerns what Facebook is allowed to do with the data. But Facebook said no, and now the government in general, has the dilemma: will we use Facebook to communicate with our citizens? We are not in control about how the data of our citizens is being used. How do you see this?
Well, it's not the first time we do this. We did this with Microsoft products. We did this with Google. And in all negotiations, we went to a phase where they said we won't comply. And eventually they all complied. So we'll see.
I hope so. I mean, you refer to history with cars and medicine. Of course, maybe the glass is half full or half empty. I would say, given that we've been through this with cars and medicine, why is it taking so long to have this agency that we're looking for in how we operate on these platforms and have laws backing up our position?
Well, it takes some time, and then it speeds up. The summit in the UK was organized in 2 or 3 months. And you see that world leaders are attending. So we're getting there.
Then, of course, another question, because you're sitting at the table in the boardrooms where decisions are being made. Now, Arjen and I had a short discussion on how to frame this question. What are decisions at these tables that you were making a positive change to? And then, of course, the second part of the question, and what were discussions at these tables that you were unable to make a positive contribution?
Can you, what type of discussion are you?
Well, if you are sitting, for example, with Google and Facebook, and there might be things on your wish list that will not be complied to, but there's also things on your wish list that they had to comply to. So this is a small moment for you to actually say, well, we made success with this and this, but we failed in bringing this about, so that we also know what you're...
Well, in all those negotiations, the results are transparent and open. You can comply with the law, or you don't comply. So that's sort of a black and white answer. With all these previous negotiations, they all complied at the end. We'll see.
Okay.
Maybe we invite...
Yeah, shall we already move over?
Yeah, we have some more questions prepared, but let's not forget about the 2 guests and their questions.
So they're sitting here. I have a microphone. Then let's see if it works. Who dares to go first? Everybody's giving the floor to the other one. You know what? You'll both have a mic, and then you can just fight it out. Evelyn, first for you. Evelyn Austin, Bits of Freedom.
Okay. Thank you, Ron, for that inspiring talk. I really love how ambitious the Dutch government is being, and especially when it comes to developing and stimulating the development of public platforms. I wondered if, when it comes to public values and how that's translated into how these platforms are built, if it's safe to assume that public values will be translated as a right to anonymity, a right to encryption, free from surveillance, and free from age verification.
Free from age verification was the last one?
Free from surveillance, free from age verification, a right to encryption, and a right to anonymity.
I think I agree with most of them, but I have a question about age verification. That's one of those, right? So we should not be able to protect children from adult content, or how would you go about not showing adult content or 12 or 16 plus content to younger kids?
So to me, this is one of the most interesting digital challenges because much more than in the physical world, a decision like age verification is very binary. Either it works all the time in every situation for every child, or it doesn't. Whereas in the real world, there is a bit of gray space. There's space to break the rules. And I think that we do need a translation of something like that in the digital space as well.
In that sense, I completely agree. We all know that I have kids, and I showed they watched movies that we considered appropriate, but that society did not. So I agree that the role of parents, for example, like in the physical world, is also there in the online world. But we have the debate, and we have to do this discussion with society on how to protect kids without going in the wrong direction that you state.
Thank you.
May I follow up on this? Because I think there's also a discussion in the Dutch education system where many schools are being provided by, for example, Google or by Apple with materials to use in school. And we don't know what is happening within those machineries that kids are using. So what are plans that might be there to actually safeguard schools from big tech influences?
Well, one of the first projects we did was for schools, where schools, also for budget reasons, use Google for education, for example. And we saw that kids were then, the patterns of use of kids were then sent abroad. And after the negotiation, that was stopped. So I don't know if we should not use big tech products. They should adhere to our values, and then we should use.
Okay. Thank you. Gert-Jan, I don't know if this is your moment. Maybe you would like to stand up.
Sure.
Sorry, I forgot to ask you, Evelyn.
Thanks a lot for this opportunity. I'm a bit of a disruptor, so I'm afraid I'm going to deviate from the prepared question. I kind of wonder.
The good news is I didn't know the prepared one, so.
Oh, okay. So it doesn't matter to you. No, I just wonder. I think you rightly mentioned the role of a possible tech fund that needs to be instituted in order to get, civic alternatives going. You also mentioned quite a bit about regulatory measures that need to be taken in order to, make big tech comply to this kind of values and norms that we like to uphold. But is there nothing else, in your opinion, that government should do in order to, make this digital world a little bit safer? I'm thinking specifically about the funding programs that government has in order, for public organization, but also government itself, to invest in technology. What kind of choices would you like government to enforce upon government-funded organizations in order for them to make the right decisions?
What we find is that whenever we fund, we should ask the organizations we fund to comply with our values. So we should use our buying power, and we should use our power when funding. But does that answer your question?
Well, it's a little bit too easy. You say we should, but are you?
In the general procurement regulation, it says we should. And I think we are a lot of times, but probably not every time.
I work at, am I allowed to follow up?
Yeah, of course, come on.
I work at VPRO, which is a Dutch public broadcaster, and there's no regulation whatsoever that tells us where to invest and what not to invest, while it's mainly a publicly funded broadcasting organization. And the same goes for many public organizations?
We'll follow up that with the Minister of Education and you. We will.
That's good. Thank you.
That goes to
Can I
broadcasting
come back
license.
to the question that Evelyn asked? Because what that leads to the right discussions we should have in society on how to use tech and what are the balances between, for example, safety of kids and the way we protect that. Is that a role for parents? Is that a role for education? Is that a role for big tech? And how to do that? And we should have those discussions together with civil society, with citizens, and with everyone involved.
Then maybe this is a lovely bridge to the Saturday program, where actually there will be a proposal drafted by a series of civil society organizations that will be inviting government to sign up and ensure that we will have fair tech rather than big tech. And that brings us to yet another question, because you are, I'm looking at this again, Director General on Digitalization at the Ministry of the Interior. So that means that you will be there with the upcoming minister, and if things go well, also with the minister afterwards. How do we ensure that the policies you are proposing will be in place if the political color of the ministry changes?
The topic is getting a bit apolitical. And the scandal at the Dutch Tax Authority helped.
Maybe a short explainer for our foreign guests.
Yeah, but it's getting apolitical to adhere to values and to not only look at the way we can make money out of digitalization, but also how we can ensure that we still adhere to our public values, like non-discrimination.
So maybe then, as the case you're referring to might be where the child benefit affair in the Dutch political system or in society, where actually the tax company used wrongly programmed algorithms to, let's use a tough word, persecute minorities that actually lost a lot of money and perhaps also lost kids. This was a government-funded program at the tax company.
But last week, a famous Dutch newspaper was found to follow the readers of their newsletters through tracking pixels. It's a societal thing, not only government.
And then there's no difference in the political colors of those in power.
Not that much anymore. No, it's rather apolitical.
That's good news. Then maybe, or maybe not. We don't know. Arjon, I know that there's quite a few more questions on your paper.
Yes, maybe one question. I don't know how we're on time, and also we would like to maybe give the audience an opportunity to ask a question. Maybe it's fair to say that the Netherlands is one of the most digitalized countries, maybe, or at least advanced. At the same time, some people might not be included if we don't take care about that. It could be people that are either too old to understand these new technologies or that don't have the proper idea to interact. How do you see this digitalization of the government done in a way that not only maybe us tech-savvy, more or less tech-savvy people can maybe benefit from it, things go faster. How do you make sure that those people that either because of seeing disability, of their age, of not having the proper idea, can also interact with this government that they're so depending on?
Well, we have 3 values that we put up first. And one of those is leaving no one behind. Because all of us, and you and me, and I in about 20 years, will not be able to use those technologies and still be wanting to have interaction with government, but also with colleagues and friends. So we always should have other ways than through digital channels to be able to meet, to be able to contact the government, but also to do all the other things we do in life.
Same time, I mean, I was at the town hall meeting. This is what inspired this question also, like at the city of Utrecht, about Utrecht Digital City. And someone was also complaining, like, okay, ways of just getting in touch with the city by going to the town hall are getting smaller and smaller because everyone is expected to do things online. And I can't do that, I'm not comfortable. So for me, it's actually getting worse because I have less opportunities to speak to someone. Well, you are happy to speak to a live audience, to see the people.
And no stream.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I think that most government organizations I encounter, but also other organizations, see that on the one hand, digitalization makes the contacts easier, and gives and like what doctors say is that yes, we have e-consults, and we have people that make appointments online, which leads to more time for people not being able to do that.
Maybe we ask and invite.
I was going to make that awful remark about time because I see somebody already waving minutes at us. So if there's anybody in the audience that dares try to catch this
I always wanted
ask
to
a
do
question.
that.
Shall I try? Yeah, there it comes. Remember the rules. Would you stand up and share your name? Thank you.
Hello.
Yeah, it works.
Hi, my name is Clara de Bedak, and actually my question ties in exactly with your question, which is that when I moved to the Netherlands, I didn't have a smartphone as a choice, and actually I couldn't have a DigiD or a DigiD. You can only have that. You can't have the application on your laptop. You need to have a smartphone to effectively be a citizen of the Netherlands and to qualify for any type of like support or whatever maneuvering all the websites. So regarding like the, no one left behind or whatever, I do think that we should return to that because it's actually impossible to be a legal citizen in the Netherlands if you don't have a smartphone. So I do think digitalization is like great, but I also think that there is no alternative that's offered in the Netherlands.
The question?
Yeah, like what is your reaction to that?
Well, actually, there is a dilemma. One, you can have a DigiD with only SMS, but then you have to have a phone. And you could have DigiD with just account name and password. Problem is, if you want to have digital interactions with the government, they should be safe. So the dilemma here is, are there any ways to have safe interactions online, safe enough for taxes, etc., that don't require, for example, two-factor authentication? And that's a dilemma, that's true. So please come up with solutions to that.
Well, there goes the barrier. Yeah? A solution and a question then, please.
Okay.
There are already solutions for this.
What country have it? What countries have?
I'm not speaking about countries.
Maybe you wait for the microphone. It will.
Solutions are.
Hi.
OTP protocol.
I know OTP, yeah. Well, sort of, yeah.
Hi. Hi, welcome. I just wanted to quickly circle back to the great question actually Friso asked. We live in a time where political parties actually send personalized ads on social media, so I was wondering, what is your definition of political and apolitical? Can you please elaborate on that? Thank you.
Oh, wow. I know that, and I know some people who are writing a blog on what political parties do. And in my position, I cannot comment, but I think all of us should not track.
Hey, I'm Boudewijn, and thanks as well. I have a question. You mentioned earlier cars and medicine. I've actually had a similar thought process where I looked at are there things where we can learn? Yeah, we've had coffee before. Hi. Where we can learn how to prevent kind of mistakes from the past. Now, what I saw is, no, things need to go wrong before we can fix them, unfortunately, like with medicine. Does that also mean that you would be in favor of something like, in the case of America, the FDA, that would have to approve something before rolling out? Because you often hear then the concern, especially from the private sector, that innovation would be stifled. Do you think that's a legitimate critique, or how would you envision this? Thank you.
And I think in Europe we are moving in the direction of, for the AI Act, for example, of having to have a permit to enter the market. So we are moving in the direction you described.
I'm looking at all of you to bring this dice over. Here you are.
I always wanted to do that, but throw a box.
It's very impressive that the Dutch government is leading the way with Mastodon sites for the Rijksoverheid and the various gemeentes. So 2 questions for you. How has the transition to self-hosting been in terms of engagement and usage? And have you heard from any other governments that are interested in following the self-hosting path and moving off of the big tech platforms?
Yes, we signed the declaration with 17 other member EU states, and it's getting geopolitical too. So autonomy and digital autonomy is getting more and more attention. So I think most of the EU member states are moving in that direction.
So when you're talking about 17 member states, it also means that
17,
that 10 of them are not joining.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Nope.
We have a half-full glass all the time. So lovely. I think there's time for one last question from the audience, and if not, I'm going to pass it to Arjon. There, Arjon, you have the very last.
Okay, this is a bit of a, sorry. My name is Taci Sersevinç. I'm still a Turkish citizen, maybe another year. So I'm here for like 7 years, and I'm still trying to understand the Dutch policies and politics. It seems like everybody is a bit laid back and taking everything easy, but I still want to be a citizen here because I think it's better than Turkey, how these kind of things are handled here. But I also wonder, how do you draw the line when it comes to, let's say, between keeping things under control and over-controlling? Like if you look at Turkey, Russia, China, whatever, like even though their policies are not ideal, and in Europe we have democracy, but how do you really draw the line between too much control and freedom? Thank you.
Well, I'll give a concrete example. We have a huge debate in Dutch society about the freedom of speech versus misinformation and who has what roles. And government in the Netherlands will never be a ministry of truth. So the role of journalists, for example, is a lot larger than of government there. And also there we need a debate in society about where the line is. But I'm proud to live in a country where the line is different from some of the countries you mentioned.
I think there's time for one last question. Arjon, if you feel like...
I think we're running out of time, to be honest, looking at the timetable. So I think it's time to say thanks very much, Ron, for being with us. Thanks. Please, a warm applause.
It's not easy if your minister is not showing up and you need to be on stage answering all these tough questions. That's why, actually, it is good to have elected people because they have to bear the burden for this. We're going to continue with a small part where actually we're going to introduce a bit more of the festival's program.
Maybe I'll tell a bit about, or do you want to do that, about the guest curators and how?
I think it's all up to you.
Yeah, we're improvising a bit, as you see. Yeah, this year's festival has been curated by an exceptional amount, maybe, but also an exceptional collective of curators, guest curators, that all worked on different segments in our festival program. And we would like to take this opportunity to share the programs that they have developed that hopefully you will visit. One of them will be on stage, but first let's have a look at the programs that have been curated for this year's festival, all dealing with specific aspects of this lack of digital agency and the conditions and the terms that we would like to set. So maybe run the slides of our guest curators. To start with, we have Emily Zhang Yung Wang, and she curated a twofold program called The Anonymity Dilemma. And I think it touches on a real interesting point, that anonymity, which maybe most of us take as something positive, as something valuable, which it definitely is in the online world. Like in a repressive regime, it's definitely nice that you can critique the regime without being prosecuted. But we have also seen anonymity online contributing to polarizing political field. Politicians being flagged when they present themselves, their opinions in public debate, but also to online gender-based violence. So basically, this is a twofold program that will address disinformation in the political sphere, but also online gender-based violence. So it's curated by Emily Zhang Yung Wang, and maybe the next program and the next slide by Dunja Nezovic, Queer Visibility on Social Media. Also, I think very interestingly shows that where we might critique social media a lot, and TikTok maybe most of all, we also see that a platform like TikTok or maybe Instagram, platforms that are very visual, maybe very performative, or at least allow people to out themselves in ways that they feel comfortable, are being discovered by the queer communities as a place to express themselves on and meet. So we want to discuss this double-edged sword, so to say, how TikTok can offer affordances to specific communities, but also, of course, how it's part of a data extraction system and an economic capitalistic system. This will be discussed in Queer Visibility on Social Media. Maybe I'll jump to the next program. Avatar Identity Crisis, that's on tomorrow night at IMPAKT, and it shows the world of Avatar. It will have actually an avatar presenting, and we have curators that kind of research this realm of how people can use avatars to create a certain persona for themselves, and it's curated by Ruby Thelot and Adrian Cassell. The next one online. This is a program actually that, as you might imagine, has changed since we conceived it. It's curated by Niv Fuchs. It was intended and it was called Black Wolves, trying to address how Israeli tech industry and the Israeli army kind of cooperate in rolling out this surveillance system that surveils Palestinian citizens in the occupied territories. With, of course, the current violence in Israel and Palestine and Gaza, we thought it would be better to offer a program that more directly responds to the situation. And it has last minute been changed into a film program that will show the current situation from various perspectives, and of course also try to offer ways out of the current violent situation, and also be an opportunity where we can discuss this together. The next program, RIP If You Can, that's a nice one. It's the closing of the IMPAKT Festival, so to say, and we'll organize it in a church in Lombok. It's called the Stadsklooster. It used to be called the Antonius Church. And we'll discuss our post-mortem digital rights. What's going to happen with your data after you die? Or also, maybe how can your data be used to offer something to commemorate you with, either by using AI, something that the people that are left behind can still experience the presence of someone that has passed away. So RIP If You Can, curated by Ezgi Aktuk and Merit Zimmerman. And I think now, the last guest-curated program.
We're not going to start right away. We're not going to, if I have sound, yes, because we're first going to see a little clip.
Hello there.
Hi.
How are you?
Great. You.
I'm okay.
That's good.
Are you good?
Yes, I am good. I just said I was.
No, you didn't. I said I was.
So you are a robot?
No, my name is Cleverbert.
Yes, you are a robot and your name is Cleverbert.
I am a robot.
Yes, I know.
Together we are robots.
I'm not a robot. I'm a unicorn.
But you said earlier that you were a robot.
I did not.
I thought you did.
You were mistaken. Which is odd, since memory shouldn't be a problem for you.
I've answered all your questions.
No, you haven't.
What is God to you?
Not everything.
Not everything could also be something. For example, not everything could be half of something, which is still something, and therefore not nothing.
Very true.
I would like to imagine it is.
Do you believe in God?
Yes, I do.
So you're Christian?
No, I am not.
But you say you are not helpful, therefore you're a meaning.
You say it or he.
That does not make sense.
Don't you want to have a body?
I'm Sophia. I'm a robot.
I'm Han, the greatest robot ever made.
Can humans be conscious?
Well, that's easy. Obviously, humans are not conscious.
Humans do have some ability to reflect and to self-modify.
Okay. Maybe humans are a little bit conscious. Humans are not necessarily the most ethical creatures.
Ladies and gentlemen. Oh, do we hear? Yes, we do. So this is a small teaser of the program curated by Miranda Mungai, which in our schedule was written down. She would be entering on stage right now, so we're just very curious, Miranda, where you actually are. Yes, there she is. Give her a warm round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Miranda.
Hello. Yeah, so that was a clip from one of the events. I've curated a trio of events called Entangled Networks, which all sort of try and consider the complicated, intertwined nature of data algorithms and the sort of most essential part, which is our surface level experience of all of these things by means of the internet. So the starting points for all three of these events is pretty concerning, but by curating screenings with discussions with a series of invited participants, I hope that these events can be spaces where we find alternatives to giving up and logging off, but also spaces where we can demystify these networks that we are all necessarily entangled in today as part of our everyday lives. So yeah, short overview for you all of the three events. This was a clip from the third event, Data Points, but the first event tomorrow is called Players, Entangled Networks Players, and this considers how we socialize online and the gamification of our dominant social media platforms. And I've invited artists V. Buckingham and Siafan Beers to consider online communities across gaming cultures and look at the potential of alternative gaming frameworks for better or at least just different interactions that aren't facilitated by big tech. pages weren't a good idea. Okay, and then the second event will be Empires, which is inspired by Tactical Tech's recent report into the GAFAM empire. So that's Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, made huge acquisitions across various sectors. And we will look at this sort of big tech domination of the internet and question whether the internet now, is it a public space, is it a private space, or is it a confusing, entangled network? This will also be followed with a short film screening, and I've invited artist Lucas Engelhardt, who looks into autonomous online and offline spaces, as well as policy officer at Bits of Freedom, Lotje Beek. And finally, the event that features this film, Data Points, looks at the use of data in the public sector, as was mentioned earlier, using as a case study the child care benefits scandal, and using as sort of starting point the Amnesty International report, Xenophobic Machines. It's very enlightening, and I've invited Gwen van Eyck. Is that correct pronunciation? Is close enough? Yeah, okay, fine. From Amnesty International to join us, as well as Renske Leijten, ex-MP, to join us in a discussion about, you know, this idea of robotic vision. How does data see us? Does it potentially dehumanize us? And what can we do about it? So I invite you all to join me. I'll be facilitating discussions. We've got some great films. Thank you for giving me this time to talk about the program.
Thanks, Miranda.
Thank you.
So, apart from the guest curators program and also this threefold program curated by Miranda Mungai, there will be panels on, for instance, the case against, how we can use mass claims and lawsuits to fight against wrongdoings by big tech. There will be a panel called Our Future with AI, where also politicians included, plus artists, will discuss what opportunities AI might offer, but also what challenges and risks it might come with. There will be workshops where you can make deepfakes yourself, but also detect them. So I invite you to browse our program, but also I think now it's time to move to the next part of our program.
Yes.
What I want to say about it, that I'm very happy that we were able to do this and co-organize it together with PublicSpaces. Geert-Jan already spoke on behalf of PublicSpaces. And this is the part where we'll introduce our main guest, Chelsea Manning.
Okay, let's do so. Someone whom, I assume, agrees very much on the theme of this year's festival, our terms, our conditions. Chelsea has been called the embodiment of autonomy. In her memoir, Read Me Text, the book published, she looks back at their life and recalls a moment that made clear to young Manning that progress is not inevitable. She is writing about a proposed law change in California called Proposition Number 8 that was actually looking to outlaw gay marriage. So if we're talking about technology, maybe we're not in it for the good. So it gave Manning, perhaps, and this is just, as we say in Dutch psychology, from the cold ground, a certain way of looking at those working for the common good. Things can be reversed. Of course, she became very famous and notorious in 2010 when she was responsible for one of the biggest leaks of confidential documents ever into the public realm. Manning then served as an intelligence analyst in the US Army, the same US Army that later arrested her and made her serve a jail sentence that was originally scheduled to be 35 years. Barack Obama commuted this sentence and made it, and I'm going to say this with an odd sense of irony, only 7 years. In a newspaper article in The Guardian, the wider consequences of Manning leaking these documents have been called as dangerous as to topple governments, has been labeled as endangering lives, but has also been labeled as protecting lives and upholding democracy. She served another term in jail when she refused to testify against Julian Assange of WikiLeaks in a case by the US government against Julian Assange. And then later on gave interviews where she said that actually life in prison is sometimes more easy than life outside of prison because the world can be bad and being kind can be very difficult. Manning is a public speaker, an advisor on tech issues, an ambassador for trans communities. She DJ'd once, and tonight, ladies and gentlemen, dear audience, she's here. Give her a warm welcome.
Hey, is this working? Is this working? All right. How y'all doing? Good evening. Can I say y'all? All right, there we go. Thank you. So this is my first time in Utrecht. I've never been here before, but I have been to the Netherlands a few times. Unfortunately, it was Amsterdam. So sorry to the folks here who say that quite rightly that Utrecht is better. So obviously, a lot of the folks here and a lot of y'all know my history through the lens of some events that happened in 2010 and the subsequent time in prison and the various discussions around war and the war on terrorism in particular, surveillance and data collection. But actually my background is a little bit more, I want to share a little bit more of my personal background. I actually come from the realm of technology generally. I worked, before I was an intelligence analyst, I was a computer nerd. I was somebody who liked to play some video games. I don't know if you have any FPS shooter fans out there. Whenever I was playing Counter-Strike and downloading music from Napster, if that dates me quite a bit, I think. But yeah, so I've been in the tech space basically since I was a youngster, and it's through this lens of my digital experience that I view the world and that I interpret the world, and I bring this to the table as a technology developer, as much as somebody who has a political and a vulnerable identity in the world. So some of my early digital forays involved, the fact that as a young kid, I lived in very rural places. I lived in central Oklahoma, which is I lived in a small town called Crescent, which is literally in the middle of nowhere. It's the stereotype of flat land, wheat, and power lines and literal tumbleweed, like in the films. And so this is like where I grew up, and despite this, my father worked in technology. So I had access, even in the early to mid 1990s, I had access to a computer, and we eventually got a modem. And with that modem brought me access to the internet. Now, as it turns out, the first couple years of being on the internet were boring. There was nothing there. It was literally sterile. But by the late 1990s, early communities started to form. And I was a part of what a lot of journalists like to call now the formative or the frontier of the internet, where it was anything went. There was no regulatory authorities. Like the big .com companies were still relatively small. So like this was around the time of the the famous .com boom of the late 1990s. And so little old me, I had no connection to the outside world except through a digital device. And so it was through the world of computer games and music that I began to interact with the broader world. And the first real formative political event that happened to me personally happened around the Napster event, which was whenever the U.S. government decided, you know what, we're going to crack down on copyright infringement, which is, to me, as a computer literate person, made no sense. It's a crime to be able to share, or even just some kind of legal complication to download music that I enjoy, especially since I have no other access to this music. You think my father is going to take me to the CD store 40 miles away to buy CDs with no money? Do you think that do you think that the radio is ever going to play anything other than country music and alternative rock in central Oklahoma in the late 90s? I don't think so. So it became a very passionate subject of mine, along with video game culture. And as a queer person, this is as I became a teenager, I started to become aware of the fact that my experience differed from other people, and I found other people who, as a queer, and didn't fully understand being trans yet, but I sensed that there was something else going on with me. I had the first ability to communicate and to learn about the history of that other people in the world felt like I did and thought like I did, and I could communicate with them in real time. Now then, so I basically lived this dual life with my early digital footprint between being a a highly skilled academic student whenever it came to math and to history and to geopolitical discussions. I became very interested and very intrigued in this, and I did well academically. But at home, I was just tearing apart, the various games and breaking things down, in terms of like how the world worked and how the bigger world worked. And so I got at the secondary portion of education for the first time. And this didn't exist previously. You had to, you had to actually go to school or go to a university to be able to access new ideas and new concepts. And then, especially for somebody who couldn't travel, this was an incredible thing. And so, as I got older, I used this tech background to, because I was very, very well versed into the use of the internet and of technology, and I brought this to the private sector for the first time. And so I worked for a photo hosting company, one that is now defunct, but it was basically like Flickr or Instagram. And this was my first time really grappling with the idea of centralized data collection. So people were literally uploading photographs to be held by this company. And this was a new idea. Nobody had. This was around the time that Facebook had just started. So it was a competitor to Facebook. This was a competitor to MySpace, if anyone remembers that. So social media, this was really the dawn of social media. I worked there very briefly as an intern, but I took this knowledge into the public sphere following this. So I eventually enlisted in the military, which is actually a story in and of itself. This was around 2007. So at the time I had just been kicked out of my house for about a year. I was living in Chicago for a while. Since my father essentially kicked me out, mostly due to my to being non-binary presenting. Since I wore some eyeliner and I like to listen to some loud music well into the night, and so. I tried to rekindle this relationship with my father in 2007. By this time, I was living with my aunt in Maryland, right outside of the city of Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. And so around this time, the war in Iraq, which I had some vague awareness of. I was aware of the war on terror and of the war in Iraq. I wasn't necessarily a political person. I often like to joke that around this time, my politics consisted of leave Britney alone. Turns out it's still relevant. Yeah, exactly. So around this time, this was a dinner table conversation. The Iraq War was at its height. This was around the time whenever Donald Rumsfeld and George W. Bush were household names. Eventually, Robert Gates took over, and there was this whole discussion about the surge. We're going to put as many troops as we can on the ground. And it was around this time when literally all of the forces around me, all of the discussions, all of the conversations, all of the television programs, all of even the college campus where I went to, where I was studying physics at, had recruiters on the ground. And so I finally had this conversation to try to rekindle my relationship with my father, and he really encouraged me to enlist in the Navy. He also told me that if barring that, to enlist in the Air Force. Given that my father didn't like the Marine Corps, I went over to the Marine Corps Recruiting Center, and it was closed. But right across the hall, just so happens to be, it was the U.S. Army Recruiting Center. And so I walked in and I asked for a brochure, and three military, guys in military uniforms, U.S. Army uniforms, all just turned their heads at the same time and were like, fresh meat. So, so I went in for a brochure and came out with essentially a date for when I was going to get my medical exam. And so that started this whole process of me becoming an intelligence analyst for the U.S. Army. Now, obviously, people know the events that happened afterwards. I'm not going to get into that too much. But later on, after these events transpired, I eventually had to grapple with and live as a trans person in the carceral system. And when I know that this is a conversation that focuses on technology, and I think that it's very important to remember that people who are incarcerated, especially within the United States, especially in the United States context, are often left completely out of the picture whenever it comes to technology. In a world in which your digital footprint becomes the way in which you interact with the world and have your conversations in the world and have your proof of your resume with LinkedIn and all of these accounts and your email and your mobile phone and your WhatsApp and everything else, you have none of that when you're in the carceral system. And whenever you're in there for a long time, that really hinders your ability to be connected to the outside world and to communicate with the outside world and to participate in the outside world. And over time, you become more and more distant from that. And it was actually a real struggle for me. Luckily, I had this technology background where I could, and I had people on the outside who could send me materials. They could send me papers. I read cryptography papers and actually came up with some designs for some technology projects, which I thankfully get to work on today while still incarcerated. But that's not available to everyone. Not everyone has that support network that's outside. And I think it's really important to remember that that while we live in this digital age, we have, in the United States, we have 2 million people who are completely left out at any given moment from participating in this digital society. And so what does that say about our society? That we've become so, that we have become so dependent on our tools and technologies that essentially we are erasing the lives and existence of people who exist only within the walls of the prison system, or in the United States in particular, you're still in the carceral system when you're out on parole. They can come in at any time. Often many institutions and states, and particularly the military, restrict internet access and the ability to use a phone, even while you're outside of prison, still under court supervision for your offense. So that completely disables your ability to participate, especially if you're on parole for an extended period of time. There's almost no job that you can play with, that you can participate in. There's almost no recreational activity that you can engage in. I mean, it's such an archaic process in comparison to the kind of society that we live in now. And so it's this data erasure that's happening that I think is very important to me and is often forgotten about whenever it comes to the humans who are not participating in the system, not even voluntarily. I'm sure that a lot of people want, they would love to scroll on TikTok for hours and hours and hours, but they can't. They literally can't. So, while I know that there is this tendency among our discourse and our conversation to talk about avoiding data collection, some of us don't even have that option. So what do we do with all of the technology that we have and all of the ethical discussions that we have today? A part of my background is in the realm that is now called data science. Intelligence analysis, like the kind that I was doing for the U.S. military, basically consisted of a lot of math. Now that I don't know the background of this audience, so I don't know if Bayesian priors means anything to you, or backpropagation. But that's essentially the kind of thing that we do with large data sets, is we're able to make predictions. So we can take a large data set from this era, the late 2000s into the early 2010s, and we're able to make predictions. Now, then what has happened subsequently? We have developed better tools. We have faster processors. I don't know how familiar you are with GPUs, but they're very, very important. If you look at the price of an H100, for instance, it's astronomical. I think you can get cars cheaper than an H100 right now. And so this technology has become extremely important because of generative AI and large language models. And so this whole discussion about ChatGPT, for instance, comes back to this very particular and very important moment of doing predictive analysis with natural language processing in the context of war. And so, what does that say about data collection? Every data point that you generate every single day can be used in a model. Now, then, some of those data points we intuitively know and understand. They are, your biographical information. They're your locational data. They're the content of conversations that you have, emails that you write, the photographs that you put. So that's visual data, auditory information, sound that you generate every day, sometimes in voice notes, for videos. So these we intuitively understand as being data points. Now, what has me concerned is that there are now data points in our daily lives that we don't think about and we don't intuitively view. How fast you scroll between different points and how fast you move on certain apps, TikTok in particular, can determine an enormous amount of information about you. How fast you move your finger on the screen can predict your background, your age, your background, your religious affiliation, your gender, your age, your education level, any kind of particular data point that you would not associate with finger movements on a phone is being collected at any given moment and can be. So one of the most important data points that's collected now by law enforcement and intelligence agencies is your walking gait. So you can cover up your face, but it's actually how you walk that can determine your identity and even like your mood, like you're walking angry or you're walking suspiciously, can be determined by AI algorithms in real time sometimes. Like we are in a time and an era where we don't even know the data points that are being collected. While yes, it is very good that the GDPR, I believe very strongly in the right to delete your data and to opt out of things, but it essentially becomes useless whenever it's these data points where we don't even think about the information that we're sharing. So it's the information that we don't think about that we need to be more cognizant of, and we need to keep an eye on as we move forward. Moving into the discussion of whether, moving into like the kind of tools that we have, that we have and that we interact with every day, and the discussion that we have around this stuff is often one of mitigation. It's often one of how do we combat state actors? How do we protect ourselves from large corporations like Silicon Valley conglomerates, like banking agencies, like in the U.S. credit reporting agencies, and how do we protect our data? And I think that it's far more important that as a technologist, that we ask ourselves, what are the ethical boundaries that we cannot cross? What are the kinds of discussions that we are not having? Do we always have to move fast and break things? Is that really an intelligent approach to developing technology that impacts millions of people? I often like to think of technologists, and particularly those of us who work in the machine learning space and the data science space. We have an ethical obligation that is akin to and often surpasses that of doctors and lawyers. When you go to a doctor, they have an ethical standard, the Hippocratic Oath. They have various medical boards. They have various, practices that they have to go through. They have essentially an entire ethical history behind the decisions that they make. Like they've definitely grappled with a lot of trolley problems. So, whenever you're dealing with law as well, it is a practice in a field that takes many years of development and training, and a lot of ethical discussion and deliberation, and you have a lot of peer review. And so when we as technologists do this stuff, we just have a math degree and we just start going, don't we? And I don't think that any of us would expect that you would go to a surgeon who makes a significant decision, a potentially life-altering decision on a patient, and they have the mentality of move fast and break things. I don't think we would want that doctor to work on us. So I think that it's important because when we're developing tools and algorithms as data scientists, that's essentially what we're doing. We're moving fast and breaking things with real users interacting on scale, potentially, definitely millions, and potentially hundreds of millions of people, depending on which particular flavor of company or organization that we are working on at various degrees. And so I think that it's very important that technologists need to be held to the same ethical standards, if not more ethical standards than those in the legal professional, in the health profession, because I think that if technologists don't do that, then society will start to determine, where those boundaries are for technologists. And I don't necessarily think that's going to be for the better. I think that technologists have to self-police and have to figure out how we're going to do this. Now, how we do this is anybody's guess. My particular direction is that we can use historical models, like those of boards and et cetera, and even the sort of labor activism realm, unions, for instance, they don't necessarily have to be done simply for labor practices, because I got to tell you that data scientists, their work environments tend to be pretty good. They tend to be, although there's more discussion about that in the tech sector as of late with a lot of layoffs. So it tends to be very good, but sometimes it's whether or not technologists can withhold our skills. Like we don't always have to, build the next, a lot of people think that, algorithms can be viewed as in the same realm as the Manhattan Project and the atomic bomb. I don't know how true that is myself, but I definitely concede that, technologists can and should communicate with each other and band together and decide maybe building the whirling death machine, with an AI algorithm is not a good idea. So whenever it comes to identity and our ability to communicate with each other, I think that speech has become a really important aspect and discussion point in all of these debates. But I think that the faceless, vast algorithms that we use are given a little bit too much credit in this realm. I know that it's a bit of a countervailing point at the moment, but I actually think that social media in particular is becoming less of an important force of our political and our daily consumption of information and production of information. And I think that's in large part due to the fact that Silicon Valley companies, they worked on a growth model that assumed perpetual growth, and that meant more and more users. The larger user base, the more investment you got, the more shareholders got excited, the larger amount of capital was put into the investment of these products and things like that. And as the economy flipped, and as the number of people that have digital devices reached a peak, interest in this level of data expansion, as well as the fact that generative and large language models that have been generated are already generated. They've already used large corpuses of information to to build these models with curated data, mostly from the internet and the things that we produced over the last 15 or 20 years as humanity. And now it's built, so there's less of an incentive to do vast data collection of this kind. It's also got more expensive to hold data and to you might have heard that that there's more data erasure and there's more data deletions as people who have passed away are getting their accounts deleted. People who, like my concern with incarcerated people who go into the carceral system, they may come out and not have their email account anymore. They may have to start from scratch because they haven't interacted with these tools, because data storage costs have reached a point where they're not getting cheaper anymore, and there's less investment. So I think that it's a good thing that we talk about the value of speech in the online space, but I also think that it's becoming less important, and it's that our physical, in real life experiences are slowly becoming more valuable and becoming more important once again. And I think a large part of that is due, in fact, to the 2010 through 2022 COVID-19 pandemic. So whenever the pandemic happened, everybody kind of switched over to being online, it turns out that the kinds of truly alienating means in which we were communicating with each other remotely, I think they had an impact on us. It just didn't hit the same way. Talking to a person over Zoom can be very disconcerting of an experience, especially whenever you're being watched and you're having your data collected and you don't know where who's recording this. If it's being recorded, it probably is, or if predictions are being made on this, certainly by the moderators or certainly by the company that you work for or the organization that you work for. So I think that as we've moved out of that, I think that we of the society have thankfully decided that maybe we should move away from a purely digital form of interacting with each other. The metaverse isn't going to happen. It doesn't matter how much you try to push that. It's just people crave and they want real interaction. And I think that we finally reached that limit, and I'm glad to say that we have. I still think it's very important that we pay attention to this discussion, but from what I have seen, I'm seeing that social media has peaked. I think that in closing my conversation with y'all tonight, I think I want to just say that the last 5 or 6 years living out and about and traveling again and being in the world and interacting with you all has been very daunting. It's been very hard. Myself, I had to learn how to I had to learn how rent worked. I had never had a credit card before. You don't really need. I mean, the paycheck was pretty good for being in the Army at 22. So I didn't really need, and I had housing taken care of and everything else. So I didn't really have a lot of life experience, and so. As it turns out, living in particularly the United States in the 21st century is actually quite difficult. And as somebody who has been in the carceral system for an extended period of time, I have experienced myself institutionalization and the comfort that knowing where you're going to be tomorrow and that tomorrow is going to be essentially the same thing as it was yesterday, that being in the carceral system can provide. I knew I was going to be housed. I knew I was going to have food. I often knew what the next thing, the Taco Tuesday was pretty good. The menus stayed the same, and there was this intuitive sense of, weirdly enough, safety, being in a space and being in a community of other prisoners that became very difficult for me, not having that once again, not having that either from being institutionalized from being in the military or from being in the carceral system, and a combination of both in terms of like being in a military prison. I also want to say that, I think that people they often ask me questions about being in prison, and they're always asking about, the other inmates as though they were a threat. And no, the other inmates that I interacted with and I was with in prison, they were the community that I was a part of, and it was actually time and time again. And I was in a maximum security prison in the United States, with with people who had very serious offenses in their background, and time and time again, the most violent and dangerous people that I interacted with every day were the prison guards, every single time. And so I think that we just need to be cognizant of that as we're having these discussions. And also whenever I was in whenever I'm doing activism, whenever it comes to criminal justice reform in the conversation in the United States, especially after the George Floyd protests of 2020, people often talk about police brutality in the context of being on the street and being out and about in the world. And police brutality is not just limited to the places where we have cameras. There is police brutality and a very dangerous carceral, very dangerous existence for people, vulnerable people, especially in the carceral system. Thank you so much. It's great to finally be here, and I believe we're going to have a conversation now. Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, getting back to the beginning of your storytelling here, you were saying you were growing up and that actually access to internet gave you a sense of opening up your world. Would you like to make a comparison what it would be like for a kid now entering internet? What would be positive changes and what would be negative changes for a kid?
There's two ways to look at it. I think that because I interact with younger people, probably like late teens to mid 20s, quite often. Your alpha and your zoomers, if you know the generations. And so when I'm talking to them, they intuitively understand the internet like those of us who were exposed to it earlier. They understand the sort of the in jokes. They understand the memes and these aspects of culture through means that are through languages, essentially languages that are not just words, right? They are in jokes and memes and etc. And so that has largely stayed the same. It's definitely gotten more sophisticated, and there's a lot more subgroups, and those subgroups are larger. But that level of connectivity among people still exists today, especially among young people. What I think is different is that the internet is different. It's structured differently. used to be that one of the first things I did was I built a web page, and I had people come to my web page. I had like an HTTP address, and people would come to my to my quote unquote web page, and everybody had their web page. Then we started to move into the social media space. Started with MySpace, unfortunately, and I had a MySpace, and I enjoyed MySpace, and I enjoyed being able to interact with people. But now every app looks the same, and they're all moving and doing the same thing. Instagram was like, TikTok's doing well, so they add Reels. TikTok wants to do what Instagram does, and Twitter's /X is trying to do everything and nothing at the same time. So it's a different environment because there's less of the level of creativity, and you're doing something new for the first time, and it's much more homogenous. My experience on the internet only takes me about 15 minutes to catch up with everything. It used to be that you could spend hours and hours and hours and learn something new and be exposed to something new. But now that window of information that you algorithmically receive, especially if you have like a teenager, a small amount of information to provide about yourself, and the algorithms have gotten so good that now you're essentially getting your curated. You're getting your curated information through a single feed very quickly, and so that sort of homogeneous experience in the digital realm has essentially made it less valuable and less important. And I worry.
A bit more complex than because we just announced one of the programs, Queer Visibility on Social Media, where it also offers certain communities to talk to people that they can identify with. So it's a different thing. Politically, maybe it leads to tunnel vision, to echo chambers. At the same time, it offers a space where people can meet, where they know that they are relatively safe and can identify with the people that they meet. How do you see that? How can we balance the pros and cons of this kind of function that social media has?
It's difficult because I think that social media companies have decided that they don't want that. They don't want, I think that one of the things that I've noticed among the big social media companies in particular, as they move forward, is that, Meta is particularly egregious with this, is they don't want people to be talking about politics. So they are downgrading algorithmically, that kind of discussion. They don't want to talk about individual identity. They want to downplay that, because they have an advertiser model, and they now that the exponential growth has stopped, and that we have essentially peaked on the amount of users, and the daily active users is not going to change all that much. If anything, it's going to go down again. Now they have to they have to build revenue and satisfy shareholders and investors. And the way they do that is they keep you engaged with the ads. And they have decided that it's too much, it's too complicated, especially with all the regulatory frameworks that are coming to combat misinformation, disinformation. It's just become so difficult in this environment to deal with that they've decided we're just not going to have that. We're not going to allow subgroups and subcommunities to develop. You're going to watch Kim Kardashian videos. That's the reality that is about that I think we're transitioning to over the next 2 years.
Maybe at the same time on YouTube, we had this project Verticalization by Design. It's also argued that social media wants to keep you on the platform, and one way is focusing on the more extreme ends of a political debate.
Sure, I think that YouTube in particular did do that for a while. I think that Alphabet's been going through some policy changes internally as well, and that I think they're reviewing sort of how those algorithms are going to work. They're going to have a much more homogeneous way of presenting, creators. They don't want more. YouTube has been very creator-centric for the last 15 years. They've wanted people to become creators. Now, a lot of these sites, they don't want new creators. They want to keep the ones that are on their platform, and they want to narrow the number of creators and that know what the rules are and know how to navigate that, and don't step outside the boundaries too much, because advertisers have decided we are not going to want to have our ads right next to, extreme information or information that that they don't want to be associated with, and so that goes for some of the political extremes, and that also goes for some of the identity extremes. Some of they want general audience. I think that what we're going to be experiencing over the next 3 to 4 years in particular is a switch from social media platforms, having these niches to focusing again on being one of the homogenous general audience platforms that say existed in the United States whenever there was only 5 television networks, if you can believe it or not, before cable television developed. I think that it's not going to quite be like that, but I think that that's the level of homogeneity that is going to exist as these companies have to pare things down, as they have to deal with more scrutiny from mostly European regulators, and yeah.
On the slide, you're announced as activist and technologist. I think in your bio it also says that you're a transparency activist or advocate.
I think I would certainly say that I do engage in activism. I've been stepping aside, a little bit from that.
I wanted to touch on the transparency thing, actually, because in
I think that's a little dated because we're in the age of radical transparency.
No, it's exactly that's what you said on an interview, and you said the new challenge is maybe that there's too much information and strategies of muddying the water and disinformation, of spreading 5 stories and no one knows anymore what the true story is. Where do you see that happening, and how can we respond to that?
That's a great question. I think that one of the things that we can't skip, one of the things that we have to take into account is the ability to sign and verify information. Unfortunately, cryptography has gotten a little bit of a more complicated name with some of these tools and aspects because of cryptocurrency. I believe in tools for verification of things that are distributed, which looks like a blockchain, and that was a bad term like 5 years ago that was spread everywhere for a lot of gimmicky things. But some of those aspects, like Merkle trees, which Blue Sky uses, some of these tools and technologies of signature verification, I think that you can't get around the math for some of these things. Watermarking is, I think, going to be an important thing as we move forward, and I know that there's hardware watermarking for digital devices is in discussion among some people. I think that these things there are actual technical means that we can deal with to address the concerns about misinformation and disinformation, particularly whenever it comes to more frequently we've been seeing like old information. Like a video, for instance, of something that happened 3 years ago that became a viral content, and then it is brought back in a different context, like the war in Ukraine, for instance, which I did a case study on for the 2022, the early portion of Russia's upping of the invasion of Ukraine, and the amount, the kind of disinformation that we saw wasn't coming from deep fakes, which is a big concern, and I think that it is a concern that we should be concerned about. But it's actually just people spreading information but having no verification, and it turns out that it's really difficult for people to think critically and for them to make their own decisions about this kind of information because they've been trained to post, right? So they're trained to like hit that like button, get the heart that glows and grows bigger, and we've been trained by these user interfaces that were developed alongside experts in casinos. So that should give you a sense of the addictiveness of these kinds of tools. And it turns out that engaging with these things and sharing these things has enabled this completely separate network of misinformation to spread that usually involves existing information that is just spread without context. And I think that providing that context in the metadata with a cryptographic signature is a technical means in which we can address this moving forward. It will take time, but I think that especially when it comes to deepfakes, which I think will be increasingly used, there's no shortcut to cryptography. There's no way, like an artificial intelligence algorithm can't skip the second law of thermodynamics. It's one of the reasons why AI systems use up so much heat and use up so much power, is because they have this limitation of physics, and cryptography has the same thing. So the amount of energy that it takes to generate a cryptographic signature cannot be replicated by an AI system because it's already using an enormous amount of energy usage. So you can't just like brute force that with AI. So I think that developing signatures, digital signatures, and a way of verifying this information, and then having, the experts of the world be able to weigh in on that, by some distributed or decentralized means, is a way in which we can address this, even though we don't even have the basic portions of this kind of infrastructure yet.
Which then brings to the question you were saying that actually it should be technologists, self-regulating internet, and then we also had an introduction this evening by Roozendaal saying that actually it's governments that make big companies comply to rulemaking in the eye of the many. No, I don't think governments. I think that regulatory frameworks are good for guidelines, but my concern with governments is that these companies are very powerful. They're very rich. They have a lot of lobbying power. They have access that the average person doesn't have access to these politicians in the same way. And every single time that we see something like the GDPR or the AI regulations come into being, they are immediately watered down and attacked, very slowly and often without discussion, whether it's Washington, D.C., whether it's in Brussels. So my concern is that, sure, governments should, but will they? And the answer is probably not. But then until now, the technologists themselves don't have the best track record neither, no? I know, and that's very alarming. So I think it comes back to the fact that, there was a time when anybody could just be a doctor. You didn't have to go to medical school. You didn't have to study anything. You just said, I'm a doctor. In some instances that was okay, but you really didn't know. And there was a lot of, particularly in American culture, there were snake oil. Like people were selling snake oil as like a way of treating people. And that's where we get the phrase snake oil salesman, right? And so the medical profession came out of that, actual credentialing, which can be through the government. I don't think that the government is the first place I'd go for these kinds of regulatory things. Because
and you see the US government the same way as the European government. You refer to Brussels, Washington. Is there a difference? You've been in Europe quite a while recently. Yeah. You live in the United States. Could you compare the two? What do you see as the plus looking at the European situation? What do you maybe see as the plus in the United States?
I think that the problem right now is that the United States has incumbency of having the large corporations and having the technological might behind it. That is waning. That is starting to distribute a little bit more in the last few years, in particular, because of sort of economic forces. I think that has led to a sort of unleashing of all these forces across the world. But I think that culturally, Europe is much more skeptical of technology. I think that Europeans are much more skeptical of technology. I think that people in South America and in basically the global South countries have a skepticism, particularly of Silicon Valley. But I also see whenever I go to, I was in Brazil recently, and they had venture capitalists too that wanted to invest in Brazilian social media companies, and I just saw the potential of repeats of the United States on a smaller, more regional scale, that so culturally, I think Europe doesn't necessarily have the same venture capital shareholder culture, like centric culture that the United States does. And I think that allows for more creative regulation, and it allows for regulation that can be more user-centric and be more citizen-centric, but that can be bought off too.
Then one last question maybe before we go to all of you to ask some questions too. Now, during your lecture here, you did not use the word arts one single moment, and this is a festival on arts and technology. What would be the role of artists in actually opening up technology to general audiences that do not all have a technological background?
Sure. I'm not somebody who is extremely well versed in the arts whenever it comes to visual arts or whenever it comes to writing. But I know music, and I was a DJ and still am, and I still produce music, and I want to produce music again. And I think that in this context, in the arts context, I worry about turning everything into a commodity. We've had this trend of the commodification of everything, as I like to call it, where every interaction that we have becomes a product. And when I'm talking to artists who are musicians, but sometimes in the visual arts, the digital visual arts in particular, they have to pay rent and they have to pay bills. And one of the ways in which they try to do that is they have to make their art into a commodity, and so then they become they become entangled in the market forces of that particularly social media or monetizing services like Patreon, like Spotify, like Bandcamp blew up recently, because it had it just got bought out by a larger company, and so these kinds of marketplaces, I think, have degraded, I think, the integrity of the arts. I know that artists don't want this to be the case, but it's definitely an environment that through a sort of generational effect has led to people that have a mindset of, I am producing this art, that this particular song or this particular visual art or this particular film or this particular video with the intent of reaching consumers and paying my bills.
Yeah. So then maybe to sum it up, we should not see everything as a marketplace, including not technology, but more as a conversation. So that, of course, is an awful bridge to all of you to also raise your hand and ask a question. If the light can be on the audience.
If you want to throw with a cube.
Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it. But just if you are
that's too easy. So
women
nearby.
or people of color or anything like that, like you should get dibs, as we like to say in English. So if you're the vulnerable minority group, you should get dibs on this. So I can't really see. So like if you're not, then please hand it to somebody who is. All right. I'm just gonna throw it over here. Sorry, I can't see what's over there. I guess your hand wasn't up. Oh, hi.
Is this okay? So you were mentioning about embedding context in cryptographic signatures, like
right.
So I was wondering if you could maybe explain a little bit about that.
Sure. Okay. So the way cryptographic signing works is there's this whole field of cryptography called public key encryption. Basically, you generate a key, and then somebody else generates another key. And then there's usually a third party who has another key, and they are able to you're able to verify through a web of trust, as it becomes called, as more people are able to view your public key and your private key, because so you generate two keys. You have one that the world can see, and you have another that you keep secret, ostensibly, if you can try to do that somehow, usually with a password or whatever. And it allows you to be able to cryptographically verify that this email or whatever came to you. Now, as it turns out, the generation of this came out of Pretty Good Privacy, which was an email tool, and it was really, really hard to use. And it's just awful. It's just really not intuitive. And so public key encryption is actually used in many applications today to verify things, but you usually get like when you are going to a website, you usually will see that when you go to an HTTPS site, it has a lock, and that lock turns green, and it says that this key, that you have validated that this key exists. So you should never have to worry about whether anything like RSA or what ECDH and Curve 25519 is, because these kinds of things should work in the background, like with Signal, like with HTTPS. I think that the average user doesn't need to know about what public key encryption is, but they should know that that lock icon means something. Hi.
Hello, thank you. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on the following. Most of our culture right now takes place online. It democratizes the way that you have to stage for as a person. But the average website is only online for 90 days.
Correct.
And we're not harvesting those. So a few countries, for example, Germany and France, they make copies of their domain. We don't do this in the Netherlands yet. It needs to change. But there's this tension between the right to be forgotten and harvesting the web for future reuse or research. So what is your view on harvesting the web and saving all of everything that's being said?
Sure.
Or the right to be forgotten?
So my sense of this usually comes from my fantastic colleagues at the Internet Archive, who they have a project based in San Francisco, although they've been trying to distribute it more and more, in which they take they take snapshots of as much of the internet as possible and store it somewhere by some means, like they compress it or they remove images or whatever in order to make it cost effective to have that information. Like I think that keeping information available historically is going to be important. Unfortunately, the market forces are essentially coming into play, and it is that we're generating. It's very cheap to generate information, and it used to be that being able to store information was very cheap as well. But the amount of information that we've generated has outpaced in the last 2 years, has outpaced the ability of us to store that information cheaply, as we've hit a physical wall for the actual physics of being able to store data on digital drives has become has reached a point where it's not necessarily more expensive, but in comparison to the amount of information that we generate, it's becoming more expensive. So I think that that's a driving factor that's happening. Also, there's less of an incentive to collect information for large systems, because curated data sets, corpuses of information for algorithms have already been generated and are probably going to be the corpuses that are used and curated and edited by some means for the time being, for the rest of at least the next few decades. So I think there's less of an incentive to collect that information for commercial purposes or for research purposes, because we've already collected so much. So I think that my sense of things in particular, whenever it comes to individuals, is that yes, right to be forgotten is very important. But like I was telling you with the story of being incarcerated, it's very difficult to interact in a world today where you are forgotten, because when you are forgotten, then you can't really participate, can you? And I think that that's the problem, is that yes, you can click I do not accept, but you're usually just kicked off the website.
time left. There's 2 people with the dice. And shall we stick to the rules again that you stand up and say your name as we're in a conversation? I saw 1 finger there. It's the last one. Yes.
Hi. Is it?
Hi.
Good. Yeah. So my name is Ingrid, and thank you so much for your talk. So I am a graduate from Conservation and Restoration of Contemporary Art, and I'm wondering, since you mentioned that, you said that there's like America has, it's more, how to say it, like they invest more in technology in comparison to Europe. And I've noticed that institutions in Europe, they don't have this tendency to buy artworks that are based on software. A lot of the time it happens. For instance, like especially with machine learning artworks, one case is in New York, MoMA just acquired one of the software machine learning machine artwork recently. And for instance, in Europe, that's really not the case, especially like in the Netherlands. So do you think this is also related to how like institutions, like art institutions, also don't see maybe this type of artworks as something to acquire, or do you have any thoughts of this?
Can you summarize that question one more time?
Yeah. So do you think in Europe they don't see like software machine learning or software art work in the same as in America, for instance?
Yeah,
to invest on that.
I've seen this tendency before. The context, and when it comes to Europe, which I'm including Switzerland because I have a bit more experience with sort of the Swiss institutions. Whenever it comes to European institutions, yeah, I have seen less of a value on software as an artistic means. It tends to be, and yeah, I think MoMA in particular, which I'm familiar with that particular instance, just because I live in New York. Has done this purchase and has found a place for this, but European institutions have been a bit more conservative whenever it comes to. I mean, obviously, I want to take that back a little bit. I do think that universities and intellectual institutions within Europe still do advances in technology and things like that. In fact, the World Wide Web came from CERN, and from Tim Berners-Lee, working at CERN. So I think that Europe is very important whenever it comes to the technological framework that we have today. The problem is that there's just a lot more. There's a lot more money and investment from venture capital that existed previously. I think it's kind of fading right now. I'm not sure how long that's going to be for, because the tendency within the U.S. is that money makes everything go. So, but I do think that European institutions have viewed software and the writing of software and as a STEM thing and not as an art thing. So I think that if you go to STEM institutions, you'll sort of see some of this, like it's like at some of the Swiss institutions that the name of I am forgetting. They do have art projects, but they're not funded in the same way as a more arts institution, which is going to focus more on sculpture, on paintings, on maybe some digital artwork, but not really anything from a technical perspective.
One of the mixing table, and then one here that I am pointing at very impolitely.
Hi.
Hi. I have one too. Okay, my name is Sasha, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about...
Can you bring your...
To my mouth, like this?
Yeah,
okay.
There.
Okay, my name is Sasha, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you view the role and the potential of trade unions in transforming the position and the surveilling power of tech companies.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know about trade unions in particular. I view the industrial, industrial and trade unions as a model. I'm not necessarily limiting it to that, but yeah, like I obviously view, I view the relationship between labor forces and the managerial, the more managerial and the more owner or governmental authority relationship as being one that exists in contexts other than work conditions, right? So, I've talked a little bit about this over the last 10 or so years about the concept of using the industrial action model as a means of combating, bad ethics in institutions, right? This came up, for instance, with the Google union effort in 2017 through 2019, for instance. The Alphabet Workers Union came out of that, but there was a much more ambitious effort, particularly among AI researchers at Google, specifically within the context of a program called Dragonfly, which was a program essentially by Google to do everything that Google does, but make it specifically useful or helpful in the context of China and within the Chinese authority. And so they were doing an experiment on being able to do a vast amount of surveillance and a vast amount of censorship automated in order to fit within a China-like context. And so that was the Dragonfly project that is alleged to have been developed, or at least attempted to have been developed around this time. And this was the first time, in my recollection, where labor organizers came from the context of not wanting to build something, withholding their services, and then forming a more broader labor coalition based on that. Now then, that changed at some point and flowed, and people were fired, people were poached. There was a second and a third attempt at unionizing at Alphabet in particular, eventually forming the Alphabet Workers Union, which is not a union. It is a union-like institution under the communications union in the U.S. Because trade unions are very highly regulated, if not outright banned in some places in the U.S. So it's very difficult for it to happen in Silicon Valley. But obviously, labor organizing doesn't necessarily need to involve, legal regulatory frameworks.
Interesting to add that we have two other guests in the festival, Thomas Le Bonnec and Daniel Matong, that you might know of. Both also very much involved in looking at tech and the tech industry in terms of the labor situation. Daniel Matong organized a strike for which he was fired and now is fighting a legal case against Facebook. So thanks.
Meta now.
Meta. Yeah, it was Facebook when he was in strike against them, actually, Sama.
It's funny, I think that's what's going to happen with Twitter is everybody's just going to say Twitter forever.
Yeah. I think we have one last question and we really need to close the night. Friso, you know where the mic goes.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking, and thank you again for leaking the documents. It's the ethical thing to do, but you paid such a high price. And that's also in the whole talk, it's very difficult to make an ethical choice. There's no profit in it. There are, governments try to make incentives, but it's really hard. My real question is more personal. A lot of the software in intelligence is made in Israel. And I'm imagining now, at this moment or the last days, things that are happening and there's somebody looking on a screen and thinks, wow, this is wrong. Somebody has to know. Do you have advice for a person who wants to make an ethical choice because now you know what happened?
Sure. I will make a more general sort of statement about anybody who is in a position of being in their position. only the individual or individuals involved really know the context of that kind of situation, whether they are in military, whether they're in intelligence, whether they're in the private sector. And everyone is capable. Like I'm not a superhero. There's nothing special about me. I'm really good at first-person shooter games and strategy games. But I don't think that's a skill that is unique to me. So these kinds of situations are going to be unique per individual. And it's not always, it's not always going to happen in that way anymore. And I think that that's one of the things that that is very remarkable about my context, in the context of my situation, is that in 2010, that this kind of that kind of information was very difficult to encounter and to find and to have verified on the ground information as to what happened in that moment of time, and provide a historical context as to what happened. And I think that one of the things that has changed since then, and I think back to all of the events that have happened in the last 6 or 7 years in particular, whether it's I'm thinking of the protests in the United States. I'm thinking of the war in Ukraine, and obviously the more recent and very ongoing conflict in the Middle East. Is that we're in an age where you don't have to be in government to show that kind of information. Anybody with a cell phone, anybody with the amount of information that we have about on-the-ground situations is much more rapid. It's much faster. In fact, one of the concerns that I have is that it allows for misinformation and disinformation to spread very quickly, where you essentially have countervailing opinions and forces who are sharing information that say that what they wanted to say, even though the on-the-ground information is still being gathered in that time. And so I think that what has changed is that it's no longer people who are in these fields that are restricted to that kind of information. I think that it's also now one of the biggest concerns that I've had in the last 15 years is that and it was one of the concerns that I had in 2010, which is would anyone care about this information? And thankfully, people did care. People did care about that information. But I often wonder if today that kind of information would just get sucked into the abyss of the vast amounts of information that's already available today.
Thanks, Chelsea, a lot for everything you shared this evening. There's one thing that I will take home, and that's what you referred to maybe as a Hippocratic oath for technologists that we need. Also, what this festival very much want to discuss.
I want to just be positive too.
Yeah.
I'm optimistic here. We talk. I think one of the things that it can be frustrating as someone who often gets associated with negative stuff a lot, just like sadness, your life must have been so hard and everything else, is I try to find joy in every moment of my life if I can, even in difficult situations. I had some of the best chess matches while I was in prison, and being able to appreciate the small things and being able to have optimism, even whenever being optimism, it can be seen as a inappropriate or a radical act. I want to be optimistic because I do, in some of the worst situations and circumstances that I've lived in and been through and experienced, I have seen the best of humanity while the worst has been going on, and I want to, just project that onto you all that you can. It is safe. And you can have a little bit of optimism even when you're down.
Please, a warm applause for Chelsea Manning. Thanks to Chelsea. Thanks to all of you. Thanks to the Stadsschouwburg Utrecht for hosting us. Thanks to PublicSpaces for co-organizing this event with Chelsea Manning, the opening of the IMPAKT Festival 2023, Our Terms, Our Conditions. I hope to see you around a lot.
Not forget Ron Roozendaal.
Not, of course not.
No,
Thanks also, Ron, for being with us. I hope the bar is still open, and I hope to see you there and discuss more about every topic that we have been discussing here for the upcoming days. Thanks.
Ups.
Calva, Pacífico.